let's get to the scrolls that we want to make. We will start with a ribbon scroll, which is just tapered and stays the same width. Let's start with the first. We taper the end. We trim the width back to constant width. What we use here is 1/4 by 3/8 material. So this is still 3/8, same than here. And we make it to fit our drawing. And then, of course, at some point, we do the other scroll on the other end. So let's get started. I just have a very short version here of how I transfer the drawing and do the measurements. We will have that in more detail by Victoria in the next session. What I do is I take my paper drawing and I tape it to a piece of sheet metal. And then I take my center punch and make little punch marks along all the lines on it. If it's turned tightly, I do a couple more points. If it's just straight, I just use few points. And then I go, before I get started, with some dividers and measure how long my tapers are and how thick the end is supposed to be. We don't need to do this to the last 32nd of an inch. I call this 3.5 here. So the taper is 3.5 long, and it's about 1/16 at the end. For the first two scrolls, I don't need many tools. I have my hammer. That's the hammer that I always use. Some think it's too big for these little scrolls, but that's what I'm used to. I have a piece of 1/4 by 3/4. 20 inches for me is a good length so that I don't burn my fingers, and I can avoid using tongs, which makes things easier. And since we haven't made the scrolling fork yet, I made this little U-shaped piece as a bending fork, and I clamped that in my vise. Here are the steps of ribbon scroll. I taper the end to about 3 to 4 inches with a 1/16 tip. I start that on the horn because it's much faster. You have to be careful to not go too far, then you might have thin spots. And then you straighten it out on the face of the anvil. You start scrolling it, and I do it over a rounded edge on my anvil. Actually, my anvil has rounded edges everywhere. On this spot, it's a little tighter, and here's a little rounder, but nothing is sharp on my anvil. And you do that with kind of brushing strokes. We will see that in the video. And then once it's turned about 90 degrees or a little more, I turn it around and then hammer from the back. And finally, I go with my bending fork, bend it that way until I have the shape that I want. Let's play a little video on that. First, I put the width down a little bit, because if I don't do that, it's getting too wide. And if it's getting too wide and too thin, then it starts folding into itself. So it's easier to first trim that down a little bit and then go do the taper. If you do it the first time, then it probably takes you a couple heats. If you're at your 20th taper, then you probably do it in one. What I show here is in two. I did the rough size in one heat, and then I cleaned it nicely after the second heat and plenished the surface a little bit. If the heat is very low, you don't get new scale, and you get nice clean surface. Here is the brushing strokes. don't hit it hard. You don't want to indent the corner of the anvil into your stock. You somehow have to imprint the shape that you want into your brain, that you don't have to go to the piece of sheet metal where your drawing is all the time. So I've got the start here, and I will leave this at this point. For the other scrolls, I will show you how we go all the way around. Here's some examples of ribbon scrolls that actually were along the way I had to walk to school in the little town in northern Germany where I grew up. When I went to grade school there, I passed by all these fences with not very nicely made, but scrolls and handmade. It wasn't a super rich neighborhood, so this is what they could afford. And I got that imprinted into my brain, so I still love scrolls. This actually came out of the door of the school where I went to. I went back there a couple of years ago and took these pictures. Here is the first ribbon scroll. And what I did on my drawing, and this is a point that we will strengthen in the next session, is I made a mark here in the middle and used that as a reference point. And I measured my stock that I started with and then put it on here. That way I could calculate how much stock it would take to make this scroll. In my case, it was 16 5/8 of the parent stock. So when I go and then do the other end the same way, I know I need to cut this at 16 5/8 from this point to the end. And then if I do the same scroll on the other end, then it will fit my frame. Hopefully it will. So for now, I will use this piece that I just made as a master to make a scroll jig.
Thanks for watching. Check out the rest of the videos in the scroll series and be sure to like and subscribe.